St. Augustine put it, to be able to know the mind of God in the process of creating the universe. So, oh, really? Okay, well, there's no way we can test that, but, you know, these people had a marvelous introspective way of looking into themselves and then somehow finding a language, a visual language, a language of signs that are not grammatical language to express, and that's what makes them great. So let's wrap up this first hour, this introductory session, with the question, okay, so if we're going to see the creative process itself, what do we mean by creativity? Because that's what a lot of modern art does. That's what the spiritual art is, being able to look directly into the eyes of the creative process itself. It's a metaphor, it makes sense. The first assignment you're going to do, which is again a non-graded assignment, but it's on the set of instructions for Module 1, is to read an essay by really one of the other, he wasn't so much a great genius of modern art, but he was a trendsetter. He basically, about the time when Kandinsky was getting started, he started a movement known as Dada. It's sort of a movement of art that was considered anti-art. His most famous work, which is actually now a very valuable piece of work, he was invited as a young man in Paris to, his name is Marcel Duchamp. And interestingly, he lived to a very ripe old age. He lived through most of all the revolutions in art that took place in the 20th century, including postmodernism. Duchamp said, well, I don't have any painting I want to put in this kind of stuffy, prestigious art exhibition. So he went into a men's room, or it might have been his own house, I don't know, and he just ripped off a urinal off the wall, took it in there and presented it and called it Fountain. This is 1917. That's all it is a urinal, all polished up. And, you know, it's obviously not only is it an anti-art statement, it's almost, you know, considered obscene, you know, and I won't go into what that means. It's like, but he did that deliberately to say, here's the most unartistic thing you can imagine. And I'm going to just take it out of its context and put it and call it a piece of art. He invented his own term for this kind of way of doing art that actually became very popular in the 1920s. It's known as it's the Dadaist movement. And the word Dada comes from no word, it comes from the babbling of a child. That's what it means. Dada, dada, dada. And these were he called these things ready-mades. Now, if you can imagine a urinal worth about $5 million, it is. And I'd never seen this thing. It was almost a myth. And about a year and a half ago, I walked into a museum just by random accident. It was just a contemporary art exhibit. At this museum, there was nothing in English in the museum. It was in Rome. It was all in Italian. And it was just kind of a mixture of modern artists. And I went around the corner, and there it was. The first time in my life I saw it, that urinal. By the way, the name he gave to this, which is what's known in the art history books as Fountain. That's what he's called it, Fountain. And so this is kind of abstraction in a very crude sense of what so much modern art was doing. What Duchamp wanted you to see with Fountain was to see that there is a kind of act of defiance, a sort of moment aha experience of rebellion against the system of order that we're all familiar with, by creating a gesture, taking an object through this gesture, ripping it out of context, in other words, off the wall of the men's room or the personal bathroom, and putting it in an art gallery. It had never been done before. And you'd say, well, you know, that's like just defacing a wall. I mean, I can give you all sorts of crude examples of what adolescents do all the time, and that never became great art. And this is, you know, this is $1 million piece of art right now. And because it was a gesture, it was the stroke of genius, if you want to call it that, where he basically abstracted from not only the lived context of the idea, the very mundane, super mundane context of experience, and put it in the world of art. And there's a whole, out of ready-mades have come a whole movement, of which I will show you an example because I've got it in my office. In fact, maybe what I'll do at the end of this lecture, give you, because this is actually from an artist who's a friend of mine down in Oklahoma, who's exhibited at a very famous art gallery down there called the Goddard Center. Same people that created the Goddard Space Center. And actually you'll be viewing a lecture of mine that I gave at a gallery related to the Goddard Center. It's called Studio 107. All these places are in a city, it's a fairly small city, but it's got a lot of oil wealth. It's called Ardmore, Oklahoma. Anyway, so he's exhibited there, and he's kind of a disciple of Duchamp. He takes ordinary objects, throwaway objects, and puts them together in what are called not ready-mades but found art. And it's actually quite beautiful in a lot of ways. I'll show you one here in a minute. All right, but let's get back to the question. So if we can view the creative process itself, this is not some mystical kind of thing where only people who can talk to the angels, can, somehow communicate. This can be just everyday inspiration, In the late 80s and 90s, there was a whole very trendy movement in art called conceptual art, where they would take actually things like, you could take part of it, what you thought was a good term paper, blow it up, put it, use modern techniques of, transposition to put it on a canvas. And say, it's not about what you see, it's about the ideas that you see in the letters and so forth. And there are very valuable paintings there because this particular trend stuck. So that can be an act of creativity, just basically seeing the world differently as well, and getting you to see that, again, that our ordinary ways of processing information aren't godlike, nor are they, even absolute. They're just conditioned. So what do we mean by creativity? And we'll wrap up here with this. I'll just get a few definitions of creativity. If you want to do this, stop the video here for a minute. There's not going to be a lot more of this. And write down, okay, what do I mean by creativity? And then compare it with some of the things that will be talked about in the course, posted and so forth. So again, I want to ask my brilliant student here, Megan. What does the word creativity mean to you?
Thinking outside the box.
Okay, right.
That's a very uncreative answer.
No. Right, that's becomes something of a cliche, though Burger King, or no, it's Taco Bell, something with thinking outside the bun, right? Right. Kind of thing, which is clever in its own way. But, but perhaps one way we can understand creativity is not seeing outside the box, if we understand box as representation, but thinking about what you're doing and daring to do what you're thinking outside the box and present it as something else. I would say, in a broad way, that's what so much of what modern art is about. It's not just about seeing differently or thinking differently, it's daring to think differently and daring to see differently. So I want to invite everybody here in this class to dare to think, see, and talk differently. Art talk, what a lot of artists are talking about, they're not talking in everyday terms. For this course, you're required to buy this big, thick book of artist statements, which we'll be dealing with in the second module. You'll actually be reading these artist statements and commenting on them. These are all famous artists, some of these artists who have their statements, which are their own way of talking about what they're doing. You can notice that some of these are very mundane. There's one artist in there who, she painted sunflowers and horses, and she says, well, what am I doing? Well, this is really funny. She says, I'm just doing this to please my cats. That's kind of, because you expect this kind of highfalutin, very, kind of intellectually challenged statement. No, I'm just doing something to please my cat. Bob Dylan, anybody here knows who Bob Dylan was, even if you're not of the of the generation like myself, for whom Bob Dylan was the greatest, creative genius, deity, not only with his music, but also with his lyrics and so forth, and also his instrumentation. And also politically, too. He was the voice of the protest movements of the 60s. Dylan was, when he was young, again, there have been a whole bunch of movies made about Dylan. Dylan was asked by an interviewer, it was a magazine interview, one of the, at the time, the most kind of important setting in which you could be interviewed for the media. And so the interviewer finally said, okay, now let me get to the point. What is your art, what is your music really about? Dylan's answer came back, well, no, I'm sorry, what are your songs really about? He said, well, some are about 2 minutes, some are about 3 minutes, some are about 5 minutes. And you're supposed to give us some kind of answer. But see, that's outside the box. Or it can be some kind of esoteric language. It can be this kind of developing your own language. Some of these languages stick. You'll find that in reading Kandinsky. He's developing a language for the first time in modern art. All right, well, we're running out of time here, and I do want to show you my ready-made, or my example of contemporary found art. So if you have any questions, or comments, post them. I mean, you're supposed to have a minimum of 6 posts, but that's a minimum. That's just bare passing, okay? Obviously, thoughtfulness, extensiveness, if you want to respond like you would in a class, that's fine too. The more the merrier. The more you do, the more likely you get a good grade in there. But again, for my in-class participants here, and I won't tell you, there's just a throng, that are sitting here in this room. But again, because Megan is smiling at me, I have to ask Megan. Megan, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions right now. I'm curious about thinking abstractly.
Okay. Well, I've been talking a lot about the visual arts, but when we get to modernist poetry, we'll be doing the same thing, but except with words. Okay, read the Duchamp. Make sure you read the Duchamp essay. There's an exercise that goes with it. It's called The Creative Act. And it's a very good essay. It's a classic, and you get to respond to it. But that's all, on the assignment section. Okay, thank you, and thank you all. And see, Megan has now added at least one more dimension to her encyclopedic mind, in this class.